Recently, Steven Crowder traveled to Texas A&M to do a Halloween special, where he dressed up like Che Guevara. One of his co-hosts, who apparently is a grown-ass man, dressed up like Greta Thunberg, and of course Crowder, one of the great conservative hip-hop artists of our time, opened up his show with this delightful number.
We for real? Listen! Crowder gon' give it to you. You two, we can do it on our own. A&M delivering to you. Knock, knock, open up the door, it's me. Back with non-stop laughter that'll make you pee. Ain't hard writing jokes about it. With trannies and anti-4 trigger motherfuckers wondering damn ditties.
Now before we jump into the main point of this video, I'll do something I hardly ever do. And that is, I'll give it up for Crowder. He's really come a long way since performing his banger, Mr. America, at CPAC in 2012. Yikes. But anyway, this event was hosted by the Young Americas Foundation, which is worth discussing for a minute. The Young Americas Foundation, or YAF, was founded in the 1960s by the rich man's Ben Shapiro, William F. Buckley. According to their website, the organization's mission is to ensure that increasing numbers of young Americans understand and are inspired by the ideas of individual freedom, a strong national defense, free enterprise, and traditional values. Sounds like fun, right? Okay, let's be fair. Let's say this does sound like fun to you. That's cool. From the turnout to Crowder's spooktacular performance, it appears that you're not alone. But let's dive a little deeper into who else thinks this sounds like a fun idea. Amway billionaires Richard and Helen DeVos, the in-laws of U.S. Secretary of Education and billionaire Betsy DeVos, who gave about $10 million to the organization in 1998, and then another $15 million between 2003 and 2012. There's also Ron Robinson, the president of YAF's board of directors, and former executive director and board member James B. Taylor, who both, according to Mother Jones, from an article in January of 2013, donated thousands of dollars to the Martel Society, a white nationalist organization best known for publishing the Occidental Observer, a white nationalist publication whose mission is to present original content touching on the themes of white identity, white interests, and the culture of the West. Robinson, incidentally, is also on the board of Citizens United, and Taylor was once the vice president of the National Policy Institute, another white supremacist organization. That's right, the one that Richard Spencer is the president of. And if that wasn't enough, then there's the libertarian activist billionaires Charles and David Koch, RIP to the still evil but slightly less evil Koch brother, who directly donated about $20,000 and $50,000 to YAF respectively, and then donated, indirectly, almost $1.5 million through two nonprofit funds, the Donors Capital Fund and Donors Trust, which are affiliated with their family foundations. So maybe you're wondering why the Koch brothers and the DeVos family would donate millions of dollars to an organization that teaches college kids about the value of individual freedom, free enterprise, and blah 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 blah. Well, the answer is, it's the economy, stupid. Meaning, it is absolutely in these billionaires' best interests to convince college-age students that the free market is sacred and that if you fall behind in this economy, it's your own fault. This is so they can pass sweeping tax legislation that'll put billions and billions of dollars into their own pockets, which is of course what they did when George W. Bush was in office and what they've done since Trump was elected. So we've established that the Young Americas Foundation is basically an organization funded by the billionaire oligarch class, along with some white supremacists, to convince young people to vote against their own best interests in order to maintain their positions of wealth and power and confuse these young folks into believing in an ideology that is pretty much antithetical to the well-being of, well, basically all of life on Earth. And Steven Crowder, the young Canadian boy who wanted so badly to become a comedian, but found out all too quickly that he wasn't funny in any way whatsoever, is more than happy to do their bidding, because Steven will basically do anything for fame. Plus, he gets to make fun of gay folks, transgender folks, teenagers, and SJWs in front of a large group of people on a regular basis. Bonus, Steve! Anyway, Crowder did a Q&A toward the end of the performance where, as far as I can tell, he didn't destroy any 18 or 19-year-olds, as he is wont to do because he's much too afraid to debate an actual adult, but he did talk a bit about the US healthcare system, which I'd like to dissect. Here's Crowder.
So what they do, and you see this a lot from the left, and you hear this in the debates, and I'm amazed, this is one thing that hopefully you guys understand and see this sort of bait and switch that happens a lot. The left, what they do is they say, hey, the United States, we spend too much on healthcare. Understood. We do have a system that's broken. It's not flawless. They say every single other industrialized country has socialized healthcare. Okay, they're not necessarily all the same kind of system, but I do understand they have something more similar to what you would see as socialized healthcare compared to the United States. And then they say they spend less, and by the way, they have better healthcare. By the way, they rank Venezuela above the United States. This comes from 2 studies. Okay, this is important to note. What they do is they talk about healthcare, and they talk about the problems that we have in the United States objectively, and we do have problems. And then what they say is these healthcare systems in other countries are better, and all of a sudden they start pushing subjective ratings. Comes from 2 studies. Comes from one is the World Health Organization. They did their global rankings, okay? Has the United States ranked right between, if I'm not mistaken, Slovenia and Colombia. Yeah, go in next time you need to have a root canal. Pablo Escobar shows up. I mean, it is unbelievable. And then there's one other one. The more recent one was the Commonwealth studies. So these are the only 2 studies that I know of. And by the way, the Commonwealth studies, I believe that was the organization. We wrote about it on the website. They listed 11 different countries for healthcare. And they ranked them. And they said, okay, these are the best from best to worst. Do you know who's ranked 11th? The United States. Do you know who was ranked number 1? The UK. Now here's the thing. How did they come up with those rankings? Does anyone here, even if you're a liberal, does anyone here believe that our healthcare is not as good as Cuba or Slovenia, for God's sakes? No, of course not. What they do is say we have problems, and then they say these people have better healthcare. Why? Because they're happier with their healthcare. Well, that doesn't matter. If I give somebody a shit sandwich and they're happy because it's free, it doesn't mean that it's better than me having a meal of broccoli and chicken breast and quinoa, right? You can say all you want that my meal's more expensive and the person who's starving who has a crap sandwich is happier with it. That doesn't mean that it's objectively better than the United States.
All right, so there's a lot to unpack there, but before we get into it, you know, one of the things that genuinely mystifies me about people like Crowder, or Ben Shapiro, or Charlie Kirk, is how little respect they have for their audience, and how much respect their audience seems to have for them. Like, really, Steven? You think the people in that audience are so gullible that they believe that these studies about various countries' healthcare systems are only based upon whether people are happy with their healthcare or not? Honestly, if you're a Steven Crowder fan, or even if you're Steven Crowder curious and you're watching this video right now, here's my advice. Have some respect for yourself, and don't let this asshole take advantage of you. But let's break this down. So Crowder mentions the World Healthcare Organization and the Commonwealth Fund's rankings of world healthcare systems as the basis for everything he says here. And, as indicated while he was giving his rant, he was either blatantly wrong or lying when he said that Venezuela and Cuba are ranked higher than the US. But I don't want to hurl insults here, so let's give Crowder the benefit of the doubt and say he's just misremembering the numbers. He then goes on to make 2 claims about these studies. And these are basically that the WHO and the Commonwealth Fund are incorrect because, number 1, obviously the US has a better healthcare system than these other mostly Latin American countries. Why is that obvious? Well, Crowder doesn't really say why, he just asks, and I'll quote, "Does anyone here, even if you're a liberal, believe our healthcare isn't as good as Cuba or Slovenia?" Again, Cuba is ranked lower than the US on the WHO ranking. But beyond this factual inaccuracy, there's simply nothing else here. Crowder's answer to why America has a better healthcare system is basically, America! Fuck yeah! Alright, now even if we decide to give Crowder a pass on his factual inaccuracies and this completely emotional take, let's move on to his biggest issue with these studies, and that is that they're subjective. Meaning, Crowder believes that the way these studies measure healthcare isn't reliable because they use surveys as data. And people in these countries with some form of socialized medicine will, of course, report that they're happy with their healthcare system because it's free, and because they have no idea what a good healthcare system would even look like. Their healthcare, according to Crowder, is a shit sandwich.
The review you had on Shark Sandwich, which was merely a 2-word review, just said, shit sandwich.
And these people think it's good for them because they've never been introduced to healthier sandwiches, or foods like quinoa and broccoli, and whatever else he said. So let's go to the reports to see if Crowder is correct here. According to the World Health Organization, to assess a health system, one must measure 5 things: the overall level of health, the distribution of health in the population, the overall level of responsiveness, the distribution of responsiveness, and the distribution of financial contribution. To put it simply, there are 3 broad categories that their study looks at: health, responsiveness, and financial fairness. Because the level or quality of these goals and the distribution or equity of them is also super important, these further criteria are factored in as well. So now that we know, broadly speaking, the factors that the WHO is looking for when evaluating a healthcare system, we might wonder, how do they determine whether a system is performing well or poor in these categories? To listen to Crowder, you'd think they simply ask patients if they're happy with the service they've received and then write up a little report about it. But let's see what this report actually looks like. So as you can see, this is a 215-page, extremely wonky report. So we'll look at just a couple of excerpts in the interest of time and my inability to make this kind of stuff all that engaging. Unless, of course, you're into like per capita health expenditures and child mortality rates and stuff like that. But anyway, this first example shows that in order to better understand causes of death in the 191 countries included in the report, the authors used national vital registration systems that captured 16.7 million deaths annually, along with information from sample registration systems, population laboratories, and epidemiological analyses of specific conditions. And this next example shows that in order to measure fairness of financial contribution and financial risk protection, the authors started with the concept of a household's contribution to the financing of the health system, which was defined as the ratio of total household spending on health to its permanent income above subsistence. Meaning, they used math, Stephen. Also, how about this? That is, the selected National Health Accounts Indicator Table that looks at the health expenditures of each member state in great detail, including public expenditure as percent of total expenditure on health, tax-funded and other public expenditure, Social Security expenditure, etc., etc. And believe me, I could go on and on and on. The short of it is, if you spent just 5 minutes looking at this document, which Crowder's betting you won't do, even though it's freely available on the internet, you'll see that it is an extremely detailed, empirically driven report that went to great pains to gather a tremendous amount of data, not just personal surveys discussing patients' likability of their healthcare provider. Now, if we're looking at the Commonwealth Fund's ranking, we can see that in order to synthesize the data for their report, they use 72 indicators in 5 domains. And those are care process, access, administrative efficiency, equity, and healthcare outcomes, with their data coming from international surveys of patients and physicians, and selected measures from the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the WHO, which we just talked about, and the European Observatory on Health Systems and Policies. So maybe Crowder is half right here, or like, I don't know, a quarter right, an eighth right, meaning yes, the Commonwealth Fund did use patient surveys as one of the pieces of data for their report, but they also surveyed healthcare providers and used measures from other institutions. What's really important here is what these surveys ask. And again, to listen to Crowder, the survey was basically something like, are you happy with your healthcare? Yes or no? So let's look at the data. As you can see, the questions asked were much more detailed than Crowder made it out to be in his rant. Their survey asked questions like, have you talked with your provider about healthy diet, exercise, and physical activity in the past 2 years? Have you experienced a medical medication or lab mistake in the past 2 years? Have you experienced gaps in hospital discharge planning? Have you skipped dental care or a checkup because of cost in the past year? And questions like those. Of course, that isn't all they looked at. We can see here that the Commonwealth Fund, like the World Health Organization, also considered infant mortality rates, life expectancy, breast cancer survival rates, and much, much more. So like I said before, if you're a Steven Crowder fan, or even if you're on the fence about him, you really have to ask yourself some hard questions. Like, why is he making it seem that these studies are unscientific and completely subjective? Did he not look into these reports at all, or is he lying? And why does he spread this misinformation on college campuses in particular? And the answer is, that's right, it's the economy, stupid. Or rather, it's the people who fund Crowder, again, the billionaire oligarch class, who want to rig the economy so it benefits them and strips regular working people of any kind of agency. And, since this was a Halloween special, I think it's fair to say that this is the real trick here. That is, people with immense amounts of wealth and power using a young, fame-craving operator like Crowder to convince the youth that there's nothing wrong with the current state of US healthcare, and if anyone tells you different, they're biased because... Seriously though, like I said before, don't let these shitheads do this to you. Have some respect for yourself and call these people out whenever they try to spread ridiculous lies like this. All right? Happy Halloween!
Home, no more home to me.
my roof is in the dust. Loved of wise men was the shade of my roof tree. The true word of welcome was spoken in the door. Dear days of old, with the faces in the fire,